How's it going, Bob? Couldn't better. I did well my job interview. Good for you. They gave me strength and trainees. That's a good heads of tails of them. You got to think at one time. It's out of the question. Do them one by one. Bob, don't disturb her. Mind your own business, he whispered. If he persisted bothering her like that, she'd lose her temper. He was so charged that he couldn't resist temptation. Stop making a fuss. It really gets on my nerves, she shouted. There's no point to talking back to Nick. He's a dictator, so to speak. They are very polite in his presence, but actually, they always talk behind his back. You despise Nick, don't you? On the contrary, I look up to him. His constant insults aroused her anger. I'm fed up with just shuffling papers and pouring coffee. I made up my mind to quit. In reality, many people have difficulty making ends meet. How can I get by on my 100 yen a month? Female clerks will complain about their routines, which are not challenging at all. Thanks to fundamental restructuring, our surplus has swelled threefold. Many people today think of loyalty to a company as an absurd notion. I have to commute all the way from a distant suburb. I'm sick of it. I wanted to spend my rest of my life pursuing my ideals. After retirement, Rita devoted herself to caring for orphans. For the sake of children in need, we cooperated to collect donations. The charity named after a man who gave away some 2 billion yen. His autobiography was released today and sold out by noon. Ted, who is often referred to as a man with integrity, is going to run for mayor. The candidate was disappointed by the outcome of the election. The municipal council should concentrate more on specific issues. It is the case that those who live on a pension are forced to lead a hard life. We should leave out this data. It's far from accurate. We tend to associate politicians with hypocrisy. They are primarily concerned with exploiting us, not with enhancing our living standards. Trump once exerted dominant influence on the Conservative Party, but now his power is diminishing. The spokesperson refused to make any comment, saying it's under investigation. The police says that someone pulling strings behind the scenes. The executive entertainment bureaucrat at Ryotei or Japanese exclusive Japan jet and hoping for something in return. His secretary flatly denied leaking any confidential information. No one dared to contradict his or her employer for fear of being fired. He sacrificed his promising career to retain his dignity. I might as well kill myself and reconcile myself to my fate. He was about to commit suicide by swallowing poison when he thought better of it. The vague rumor proved to be false. Nevertheless, some skepticism lingers on. A senior official is suspected of taking bribes from the company, but there isn't sufficient evidence to arrest him. Jason, who was in charge of the project, was dismissed for corruption. To my knowledge, he was not involved in the fraud scheme. They have found other tools while examining a file of relevant documents. During a trial, it came to light that they had been covering up illegal transactions for decades. The detective took down his testimony on the spot, word for word. For the first time in my life, I felt a pang of conscience, but there was no other way out. I am still haunted by a vivid nightmare I had last night. By and large, reporters don't hesitate to intrude on one's privacy. The author revised his manuscript over and over again. He is second to none when he comes to find fault with others. On the whole, the elite are not sensitive to criticism. When a tabloid revealed that he was a drug addict, his reputation was all but ruined. They considered the asset of the defense program and pointed out our numerous flaws. We will not tolerate anyone who engages in terrorism. The Northwest rebel was ultimately captured and confined to jail. Troops were swiftly called in to put down the riot. We should appeal to reason instead of resorting to violence. I suggest that are protective tactics for the moment. The armed forces succeeded in occupying the entire territory. Under the circumstances, the enemy had no choice but to surrender. They can't hold out any longer. Sooner or later, the hostages would be set free. Under the reign of tyranny, innocent people were deprived of their citizenship. Some soldiers are reluctant to obey the command. His regime was bound to collapse. The Allies condemned the invasion as a violation of our UN resolutions. You cannot rule out the possibility that civil war break out in that country. The colony declared independence and became a republic. An immense monument was erected of the honor of a noble patriot. He got down on his knees and prayed for the souls of the deceased. The Supreme Court is located near the Imperial Palace. The protest group was protested against a ban on abortion. The Senate board remained neutral in the bitter controversy. Ford has been a difficult situation all week long. He is no longer capable of coping with it. The summit talks were to be broadcast simultaneously throughout the world. Diplomatic dialogue helped put an end to the conflict. Johnson was appointed as a goodwill ambassador to foster mutual understanding between the two nations. The spirit to predict international tension will build up. In my opinion, permanent peace is nothing but an illusion. Ethnic minorities struggle against prejudice, poverty, and oppression. We must make every effort to do away all discrimination. The immigrant has endured physical and mental pain. The amendment was rejected didn't take racial diversity into account. Needless to say, the refugees were longing for freedom. According to surveys, 3 in 5 people today are indifferent foreign affairs. What will become of the Japan-US relations if the security treaty expires? Unless Japan limits its unfair tariffs, the US will impose sanctions. Trade fleets materialize between the two nations at any moment. Our top priority is to settle this dispute once and for all, so we are ready to meet them halfway. The federal budget was narrowly approved by Congress. He argued that the administration must look for alternative sources of revenue. Opposed that the overwhelming majority in favor of legislation. The cops are searching for clues to the brutal murder. That must be insane. He can't distinguish vice from virtue. The fingerprint left on the weapon corresponded with the suspect. It was kind of a surprise when the noted psychologist was accused of kidnapping. The jury's guilty verdict gave rise to a widespread debate. The man pleaded for mercy, but he was sentenced to 20 years in prison for his crime. The officer on duty perceived an elderly man coming up behind him. He caught sight of the thief attempting to break into the house. That day before yesterday, he witnessed a weird incident in the wilderness. I became aware of someone staring at me from across the aisle, so I turned around. But there was no one in sight. She screamed of the horror as someone took hold of her arm. Informed of her safety, he breathed a sigh of relief. The bullet penetrated his chest, leaving him in critical condition. At present, it is uncertain whether he did down deliberately or by accident. A delicate fire burned down, leaving a heap of ashes. All of a sudden, the fireworks warehouse exploded and took 2 days to put out the blaze. A bomb went off in the 30-story building and more than 50 people are seriously wounded. The cargo vessel down from the Athens sank in the Mediterranean without a trace. The wreckers were flown to death during the expedition to the Antarctic. The tragedy must be remembered so as not to be repeated. The exhibition offers profound insight to ancient civilization. Giotto is credited to sowing the seeds of Italian Renaissance. Bob mounted a portrait in a fancy frame, but it was upside down. This magnificent cathedral dates back to the Middle Ages. Ancient religion inspired him to create splendid sculptures. They explored the desert in search of the buried treasure. But millionaires instead of acquiring the masterpiece, no matter how much it cost. Myth and legend should be handed down generation to generation. The linguists, the influence of the several Chinese dialects, the tribe worships its ancestors and speaks its own language, which is not familiar to us. The anthropologist says the old customs still prevail in the province. The wicked witch cast an evil spell on the man and turned him into a bug. They proceeded along a steep path, which was the sole access to the border. When a big ape emerged from the cave, they got frightened and ran away. Believe it or not, I saw an alien, and then it vanished. Give me a break.